Welcome to Edge of the Rabbit Hole. Got a great episode up for you tonight. Keith Johnson is in the house. Of course, I'm Mike Ricksecker, your host, author, and ghostorian, with my co-hostess, as usual, Vanessa Hogel, and our lovely chat shenanigator, Shauna, down in the chat room, shenanigating everything down there. Of course, Keith really doesn't need much of an introduction. We all know Keith Johnson, but demonologist, world-renowned. He hosts a show, Ghosts Are Near, and he's an author. Got one of his books right here, Paranormal Realities 3, which we're going to get into a little bit tonight. We're actually going to be talking about vampire lore. Met up with Keith just recently here at Ocean State Perron, and we were having a pretty good conversation about vampires, so I thought we would just continue that here on the show. So, Keith, welcome. Great to have you on.
Well, it's great to be here. Thank you for inviting me. It's my pleasure. Believe me, it's my pleasure.
Yeah, absolutely.
We get to talk about one of my favorite subjects.
Oh, yes, yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. And as Mike mentioned, we met, of course, he had worked with my brother Carl before some years ago, as you have yourself. And we met, Mike and I, actually, we were sitting right next to each other. He was behind me, I was behind him. We turned around, and that's how we met at Ocean State Perron recently in July. So that was quite a good event. It's always an excellent event, wonderful weekend. And I did get the privilege to see Mike lecture about shadow people.
He's very good, isn't he?
Yes, he's extremely good, extremely professional. And he's one of the closest people to shadow people that I know.
I've had a few experiences, that's for sure.
Right, yeah, you have had experiences with them. Mm.
Yeah, and I appreciate your questions during the Q&A.
Sure, that was a lot of fun. A very enjoyable weekend. And it happens every year, Ocean State Perron in July. Usually it's the around the second weekend of July, and it's held right in Harrisville. And those who have seen The Conjuring are familiar that's the Conjuring case was right there in Harrisville, involving the Perron family. And of course, we were sitting right with the Perron family as well. You know, very good friends of mine, and I do have a connection to that case, which we can get into if you'd like. But it's a fine.
That connection.
Well, yeah, because it's very different than what happened in the movie, where basically you and Carl are the ones that made the connection of the Perron family to the Warrens.
Yes. Yep. That's not what they showed in the movie, but.
No.
I, for one, have to say that irritated me because I knew about that connection. I knew about that, and
you already knew, yes.
Yeah, and when I watched the movie, which of course this was none of Andrea's fault, when I watched the movie, I'm like, but that's not true. Right. That's not how that happened, know. And it was a bit frustrating, and for those watching, that's just another example for all of y'all out there in YouTube land. When we tell you don't believe everything you see, we're not kidding, okay? Because if something like that is so easily fudged on, imagine about the big stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So, Keith, you want to go ahead and talk about how that happened? Because we do have a couple of people just immediately in chat asking, oh, yes, please, would love to hear about the connection.
Okay, well, essentially, it was back when Carl and I were still teenagers, actually. We were still teenagers, and this was the early 70s. So there was no internet. We belonged to a group affiliated with Rhode Island College called PIRO, Parapsychological Investigation and Research Organization. I put a little ad. I thought it looked kind of nice. I drew a frame around it and everything. Little ad in a local paper, and it was answered 3 weeks later by the Perron family, and that's how we became involved. Carolyn Perron mentioned that there's something very, very horrific going on in our house. We have an 18th century house in Harrisville, Rhode Island, and if you would you be willing to come investigate? So we did come and investigate, and while we found that was the real deal, that there was nothing fake about that. That was really, anybody who wants to say that was just faked by the family, they were never there at the time. Because I know a lot of trouble happened since, a lot of controversy, which always happens in big situations like this. But when it was just us and we came to visit them and investigate it, yes, there was quite a bit of activity. As soon as I arrived, I felt that there was a force field on the property. It was hard to even step onto the property, but I had been praying the whole way. I had my Bible open the whole way, and I was accepted by the Perron family right away. The girls just maybe it's because I had hair. I was like about 127 pounds. I had hair down past my shoulders, and they just grabbed me by the wrist and they just led me all around the property and gave me a tour, showed us Bathsheba Sherman's grave, took us to that cemetery, and then took me upstairs. And meanwhile, my brother Carl was there and it's talking about shadow people. He was in the house. He and Donna, the chairperson of our organization, were talking to Carolyn. He excused himself to use the bathroom upstairs, and while he was upstairs, he looked down the hallway, and this is just around twilight, and an August evening, very hot and humid, and he sees the shadows, kind of like a ball of smoke coming right towards him, and just before it makes contact, it dissipates. So he did experience that. They experienced disembodied footsteps going on upstairs when nobody was there. The children took me upstairs and sat me on the bed and said, "This is the room where most, two of us share this bedroom with the most frightened there here." And you could just feel the energy just building, coalescing. Very, very difficult to stay in there, but I realized I had to. I was the closest thing to an adult, even though I was only a teenager myself. And there was a window beside me that could not have been closed. They even tried closing it with a hammer over the weeks because it was an old house, and just the humidity would not allow this window to close all the way. I asked, "What religion are you?" They said, "We're Catholic." So I told them, "Why don't you try calling upon the name of Jesus Christ when you're frightened?" As soon as I said that window slammed. It slammed with horrific force. And you could just feel the vibration. The air became so thick. It was like an electric, hard to describe. It was like an electric current. But anybody who's experienced this knows what I mean. It's like an electric current, and it's draining you. And one of the girls was slapped on the left side of the head. Demonic sign right there, that she was slapped counterclockwise, practically flew off the bed. They were screaming and crying. I called upon the name of Jesus twice more, told them, "Don't be afraid," and it left the room like that. Wow. So, yes. So soon afterwards, we went downstairs. It had left the room, but it didn't leave the house. But that just shows the power in the name of Jesus, and when spoken in faith. And we came downstairs, and that's our first night of being involved in the Conjuring case. So that's a true story. And we were close friends with Ed and Lorraine Warren. They said, we told them, we gave them a call and just asked for some advice. They said, "Well, we'll do more than advise. We'll come down and we'll work on this case with you." And that's how they became involved, you see.
Now, let me ask you, just because there's always speculation about this, and not even just with the parents haunting, but with others as well. Do you think that the activity that was going on there was exacerbated or amplified by the fact that there were so many young women?
I think so. That's because, a great question. Yeah. Yes, very, very good question. Very good question. Not that there wasn't activity there. Earl Kenyon, the gentleman who owned the house and sold it to the Perron family, he would keep the lights on all night. And that's not a made-up story, because I know people in the neighborhood that lived there at the time said, yes, this man, Mr. Kenyon, used to keep his lights on in that house all night long. And he, even before the family knew what was going on there, when they first sold it, he went for a walk, and it was actually snowing out. He went for a walk with Roger Perron, the father, and said, "Raj, do yourself and your family a favor. Leave the lights on all night in the house." And Roger just didn't know what he meant, but he just agreed with him and ignored it. But then he found out that things do happen in that house. And so anyway, that's how the Warrens became involved. And it was the the fact that this young family moved in, and one, there were 5 girls in the family, and the very young family. Two, they were the only generation that was not direct of the direct bloodline from the original family. The house was built in 1736, and it became known as the Arnold Estate because various members of the Arnold family lived there. So it became known as the old Arnold Estate, and they were the first family not of that bloodline. So that may have had something to do with it too. So known as the Dexter Richardson / Old Arnold Estate. So that's the history of the house, and a lot of bizarre things did happen there.
Yeah, and I mean, you're explaining something that happened in just one day there, but that was a lot of activity that they had over. The movie shows, that maybe it happened over a couple of months or whatever. That's kind of the feel that you get for the movie, but this was 10 years worth of time that they were there.
You're exactly right. Yeah, the Perron family did live there for 10 years. 10 whole years. Now, it wasn't a constant barrage of negative activity. There was even some positive activity there. I believe there was even angelic attention. Yeah. But
well, that's why Andrea's book is called House of Darkness, House of Light, because there was also a lot of light there as well, not just the dark.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. But it was shortly after our visit and shortly before Ed and Lorraine became involved that we told Carolyn, anything happens, give us a call right away. Well, we did receive a call midweek. Carolyn was just terrified of what was happening there. And it was about 3 days after our visit. And it was early in the morning, she told us that she woke up knowing that something was wrong. It was just starting to daylight out. And my personal experience is that is really, I mean, we know the witching hour at night, and we know the demonic noontime, 12 to 3:30 a.m. But this was, I also found that twilight time seems to be like create kind of a portal for spirits to come and go. Activity starts and ends. But it was in the early morning hours, and she woke up in the bedroom. Something was wrong. She smelled a scent of decaying meat, rotting flesh, mixed with sulfur, is how she described it. And something was, there was like something sparkling on her dresser. Then it stopped. She turned over, and there's this, it's hard to describe what this was, this kind of phantasm in female form. The only way you could really describe it is like is of a desiccated corpse, just standing there looking at her. Strangely, of course, there was a story of a suicide in the barn. A woman had supposedly hanged herself in the barn. Well, this spirit, the head was hanging to one side onto the shoulder, as if the neck had been snapped. But it just started saying such a bizarre chant to her, and she couldn't remember it all at the time. What she did remember was the spirit said to her, "I'll drive you mad with fiery brooms. I'll drive you mad with death and gloom. I'll drive you out, but 'twill be too late, for you'll be dead." And then it just vanished, and she's terrified. And of course, Roger wakes up, her husband, and he's got bloody scratches on his back. And so that was not a good night. So no wonder she called us.
Yeah.
This is terrifying me. She said, "I'm a tough Georgia woman. I grew up on a plantation. I've seen all sorts of accidents, but this is just truly horrendous. This is too much to take." And so that was our initial experience with the Conjuring case, and it's all true. Some of it is worse than was portrayed actually in the movie.
Wow.
So Andrea is doing the film version. It will take some time, of course, but she does plan to do a trilogy, House of Darkness, House of Light, for the screen. So.
Yeah, I know that's in the works. So we do have a few things to catch up with from the chat. First of all, there's a $10 super chat from Tom McNicholas. Thank you very much, Tom. His comment is Happy Tuesday. We also had just before the show started, a $20 super chat from BD Flint. She's baking cookies for her mother's birthday and will not be able to join us this evening. So that's
Happy birthday.
yeah. So Ren Oak is wondering when we're going to get to the vampires. We will here in just a little bit. Gary the Fam Keith wants to let you know that he is in the chat. He works with you.
Oh, excellent.
Yep.
Excellent. Yeah. Good friend Gary. Yeah.
Yep.
Those Chasers. Yeah.
Yep. So, a couple quick questions from Betty Lange. So, was the house to blame?
The house, in a matter of speaking, the house could have been to blame because I think the property, I don't know if tainted's the right word, but I think there was something there long before white settlers. Long before white settlers, I think there was something there. In that same community, during the 19th century, a gentleman found a gigantic skeleton of a Native American in his basement. So,
wow.
Who knows what went on there? But I think from day one, when the house was first built for Dexter Richardson, now he married an Indian squaw, and apparently the vicinity was not that populated by white settlers at the time, and so he was not harassed that much for doing that. But who knows what tribal things went on there. They have their lore and everything, their spiritual worship, and they have negative and positive, just like in the Christian faith. So who knows what could have gone on there. My personal opinion, from day one, something was going on there. So I think something was always in the house, and I do not believe it was of a human nature. I believe it was inhuman spirit from the beginning. And that's always my belief. I do not think it was Bathsheba Sherman. No. I do not think so. It's Bathsheba was actually a Baptist woman. The Christian community. She was given she passed in 1885. She was given a wonderful funeral oration and buried in hallowed ground in a Christian grave. Now, community folk just don't do that for suspected satanic witches.
Right.
So a lot of that came about posthumously. I believe it was after her death. These rumors came about, and of course her grave unfortunately was vandalized. Somebody kept smashing the headstone, and first time we saw it, it was broken in half. And fortunately, it has been repaired now. And yes, but I don't think it was her. I think that she got the bum rap and everything like that. And whatever spirit came into the room where Carolyn was in her bedroom, I don't believe that was a human spirit, and I don't believe it was even posing as Bathsheba Sherman. I believe it was posing as someone from the 18th century, the way it talked, very, very, very archaic language, which Bathsheba Sherman would never have used. And so, yeah, Bathsheba gets a bum rap, especially in the movie. In fact, I even wrote... I wrote out some things. I bet when the Conjuring comes out, they're going to say that she's related to a witch from Salem, and sure enough, that's what they said. Yep. She's related to them. And that presumes that the witches in Salem were guilty, which they weren't.
They weren't real
witches. So
yeah,
of course not.
I had 3 ancestors in the witch trials.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah, Deliverance Hobb, her husband, and her daughter Abigail.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh.
So it never ceases to amaze me how if people don't have somebody specific to blame, they have to create somebody.
Yes.
And that is what's going on, as opposed to saying we don't know why this is happening. That for some reason people have the hugest problem with that. They have to have a villain.
Oh, yeah.
And the fact of the matter is, life just doesn't work that way. Sometimes there's not a specified villain. Yeah. But I am curious. Do you feel that due to what you experienced while you were there on those grounds, and how that set you up at such a tender age, how did that set you on this course, especially with coming into the vampirism that we have viewers wanting to hear about? How did that set you up for that? Was it a good thing? Was it a bad thing? Indifferent? Well, what are your feelings on that?
Well, as horrific as it was, I really think it was a positive thing. I think it was a positive thing. I felt I was being led in this direction, and that was the verification. It's like I was, an insomniac at the time, and 3 weeks before I ever met the Perron family, I was praying in the middle of the night and in a darkened room, and I really got, I wasn't hearing actual voices, but I received the impression that I was to meet a family. You will help them out. They're under demonic onslaught. You will meet them, and you will eventually become like one of their family. So, and then 3 weeks later, the Perron family, we were introduced, and that's how it happened. So I really think that was the catalyst, and it helped me believe that I was on the right track. By the grace of God, by the grace of God. I mean, I wasn't going in there saying, by my power, this will stop. No, by no way would I ever do that. But
thank you for that.
You're welcome. Yeah. You're very welcome. I might not be around, at least not in the same state of mind, if I had to, go under my own power. So, but yeah, that's how it started for me.
Wow.
Yeah. So
what a way to start.
So we do have some of the questions coming in from the chat, but to kind of wrap it back up into the vampire aspect. Now you mentioned Bathsheba Sherman was buried in hallowed ground. Well, Shauna and I were just watching actually earlier today. We're getting prepared for the show, so we're watching some things on vampires just to kind of get everything back in the mind, and came across this interesting report about a quote unquote vampire in Greece, on an island out in Greece, that was buried under the city wall, and he had stakes, like 3 different stakes through his body, or maybe it was 4, to keep him pinned to the ground. So to me, that's an example there where they're already marking him as this is a vampire. They didn't put him in their hallowed ground. They kept him, under the city wall. So to me, that's a perfect example there of what you're talking about. Bathsheba was buried in hallowed ground, where somebody that would be considered evil in nature would not.
Yes, exactly. And that's interesting that their culture would do that. And it also reminds me of the bog finds. I'm sure you've heard of them. The people that were sacrificed during the Iron Age. Many of them were Scandinavian. They were Danish, Germanic, Swedish. Irish. They would actually sometimes sacrifice people for the good, and these were not murder victims as was originally thought, because when their people died, they would burn the bodies. Their form of burial was cremation. So these people were actually sacrificed as a holy sacrifice to ensure a good harvest and whatnot. And of course, ironically, the people that did away with them long since turned to dust, and these bodies, many of them had been preserved because of the acid, the tannic acid, and the tanning process that goes on in the bog water, in the peat. And of course, people harvesting the peat for fire source, and they've come across these bodies, and they thought they were recent murder victims. So it turns out they were about 2,000 plus years old. So
now to expand on what Mike was just talking about, I need to see if either one of you have ever heard of this. About 10 or 15 years ago, I was doing some research, and I want to say, and please, y'all, correct me if I'm wrong, but I want to say that I read something about the president of Romania, or one of the high officials in Romania, who a long time ago, they were so certain he was a vampire that he was actually dug up and desecrated again. Am I remembering that correctly, Keith?
Yes.
Thank you, because I can find it anywhere now.
Yeah, and that was kind of the source, the way it was done, even in Rhode Island over the years, a couple of centuries ago, where it would be kind of an exorcism where these things are happening. Okay, let's find the vampire. There's a vampire doing this. So they would find the corpse. If they could find one that wasn't properly decayed, or a suspected vampire, they'd dig it up and mutilate the corpse in some way, disturb the corpse in a way that it was not going to come back anymore and bother anybody, whether that was staking it or doing something, even sometimes going so far as to turn the body over, so when it tries to get out, it's going to dig its way down further, you see?
Exactly. Removing the head was another.
Yeah.
was another big one. But what I find most fascinating is if you go back through history, and I mean back through history, during the times when there was absolutely no way for countries or different regions to communicate with each other, you can find stories of what we would consider vampires that resemble ones from other regions perfectly. They might have had a different name for it, but the mannerisms, what they would do, how they would be taken care of, are all fairly identical. And there's no way for these different civilizations or societies to communicate. How can you explain that or reconcile that for something that people believe doesn't or never existed?
Oh, it was the Indians. That's what the white populace said in New England. Oh, it's the Indians. Of course, that's where they got it from. That was their practice. It was the Indians. They were the scapegoats because they blamed the Indians for everything. We're actually, it was more European. The source was most likely European, where they derived these ideas of disrupting the corpse to the revenant from coming back and preying upon the living as sleeping victims. But
yes, it seemed like a lot of the origins
scapegoats for everything. So that's what they said back then, but it wasn't true.
Yeah, it seemed like a lot of the origins for the vampiric legends came out of Eastern Europe, and that the practices that were performed in Rhode Island seem to have their origins back there. So, do you think you find that to be true? Okay. Yeah, and I saw in the chat there
European stock.
Yeah, I saw in the chat there somebody mentioning Romania, not only the leader that you're talking about, but also a local, and I actually dug that one up. So that was see, there's Keith, but there's a article. It was Toma Petre. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it right, but yeah, I mean this is just in 2004. Yes. So it was just in 2004, and they're still doing it today. The
oldest story I've ever read, or the insinuation of vampirism, the oldest one I've ever read about was over 4,000 years old.
Wow.
4,000 years old.
That's a long time ago.
Which predates Christianity by many, many moons. And so that's what I find so fascinating, is that even if we consider it something that never existed and possibly be around today, if the stories have lasted 4,000 years, don't they have some basis in fact?
So there's always some basis in fact. Always, you hear these stories; they're usually fanciful stories, but there's always some grain of truth, some basis in fact. And even fairy tales mostly have some basis in fact as well too.
Absolutely. I'm glad I'm not the only one who thinks that. I'm not the only crazy one.
All right, we do have a couple of.
That's what I thought when I was my brother and I were 17 years old. The first time we met Ed and Lorraine Warren, I said, "See, we're not the only crazy ones."
Exactly.
I'm not saying they were crazy, but I'm saying that the way it was unacceptable at the time. So
right. Yeah, and I think that's something that's been very progressive lately, is that there's more and more people accepting what we do, rather than back in the day it was very difficult to break through those barriers.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely.
So we have a couple more questions down here in the chat. Mike? Yeah. So Chuck Banks from Beyond the Light Network, where we are simulcasting, asks, are vampires considered demonic in nature?
That depends on who you talk to. Are vampires considered demonic in nature? To me, they are. There's folklore, of course, but I do believe there's some basis in the demonic as well. They are considered demonic. Some people believe their origin is to be demonic, and that gets really, really complicated. But supposedly there was the first corruption of humanity. The first major corruption could have been blamed on spirits that took on the nature of the vampire. They took on the nature of the vampire and actually emulated humans. And this, I'm saying this is theory. This is some people's belief, but they took the blood, the DNA, they took the life force of human beings, and that's how they replicated themselves as human beings. And of course, this got out of control, and there was a race of giants, and that's even mentioned in the Bible, of course.
Yeah.
They preyed upon each other. The earth could no longer sustain them, and then you get into the Apocrypha. You get the book included in the Bible. You get the Book of Enoch, where it says the earth could no longer sustain them, and they began to prey upon each other, drinking each other's blood, and even cannibalizing each other. So, and we know that has happened throughout human history as well. So,
True.
I don't know.
Oh, sure.
Wow. Have you found that more stories tend to circulate in specific regions?
Yes, they do. And New England was one of them. Well, we were once here in Rhode Island. Rhode Island was during the 19th century. Rhode Island was known as the vampire capital of America.
So cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, we're also Shoelace capital of America. See, I work at Carl and I work at Slater Mill. So I happen to know that fact. We're the shoelace capital as well, but we're also known as the vampire capital.
I have to get out to Slater Mill one of these days. So, so you want to talk about some of the different vampire stories out there? I know you talked about Sarah Tillinghast in Paranormal Realities 3, which I thought was very interesting because it seems to be in not only do you have the vampire legends, but you also have a lot of things going on with dreams, which I'm very interested in. But you also seem to have some ghost stories mixed in there as well. So it's kind of almost like a little bit of everything.
Yes, and that's a good point. What you just said, Mike. It's a little bit of everything, and a case I'll get into a little later. That has a little bit of everything, but essentially, Sarah Tillinghast. Now, this is true. These were all real people. They really lived. There's variations on the story, but these were real people who actually lived, and the main points of the story are actually true. There was a man named Stutley Tillinghast. So Stukely Tillinghast was a prosperous apple farmer. He had an apple orchard and a peach orchard as well. And he had a dream one night that half his orchard had died and half of it was thriving. He smelled the scent of decay in the wind and heard his eldest daughter that was still living at home, Sarah, very beautiful, the only daughter, the eldest daughter that was not married yet, and very beautiful, lovely girl, heard her voice calling to him on the wind. He woke up, and of course, people believed in dreams like that. Now, his wife, Honor Hopkins Tillinghast, had blessed him with 14 children, and he was really was like a character of Job in the Bible. God had blessed him with so much, and prosperous orchard, lots of money, wonderful, healthy family. And then one by one, the plague started taking the family, and Sarah, unfortunately, Sarah was the first. Now, the white plague was also known as consumption because it consumed the individual, and we know it as pulmonary tuberculosis today, of course. But Sarah quickly wasted away and died. She had the galloping form very fast. And then one by one, some of her siblings started becoming sick too. Every one of them complaining, Sarah's coming into my room at night, sitting on my chest and making me hurt. And then that child would soon expire. And Sarah was only 22 years old at the time. And this went on for, of course, in the story, I fleshed it out and, introduced different characters and such and conversations that I had to fill in. But this went on for the course of a year until finally Honor herself began having visitations of Sarah and became ill and told her husband, soon I will be joining my sweet Sarah in the afterlife. Well, then Stukely Tillinghast, whose nickname was Snuffy because of the brownish snuff-colored jacket he wore, he went wild. He went crazy. He's got to find an explanation. Went to the local Grange, asked them, because the farmers were members of the Grange then, and they suggested that he try an old remedy that had been tried in Cumberland recently in 1796. Now here we're talking about 1799, and the cure, the outside chance for a cure, is to dig up the bodies and find. And 4 of his children had died so far. Well, they went to, and you've got a picture of this. This is late in the year, and they've got cider, hard cider, and they're passing that around to keep themselves warm. They've got the bandanas always, and they start digging up the Tillinghast children one by one. They're all well decayed, going back to the earth, and till they get to Sarah. When they took Sarah out of her coffin there and pulled off her burial shroud, there she is, just like she's alive. Her bright blue eyes were wide open. She was a big smile on her face, and she looked ruddy, as if she had been drinking blood. And of course, they said, "Well, that's obviously the vampire." And of course, that is that picture. I'm glad you show that right there. It may be, although there's no inscription on it, Sarah's may be the one to the left, the way they would bury the children. But we know there's medical explanations for that now, of course. Her teeth were showing, her fingernails and hair had grown. Well, because when the body starts to decay, it does kind of bloat and become ruddy. And the fingernails, the nail beds, the skin pulls back, giving the appearance that the nails have grown. The skin starts to pull back. That could have come for the smile and the eyes opening. So although they usually would keep a chin strap on to keep the jaw from opening. So her father, in front of the men, they all were there for support. He took a carving butcher knife and cut open her chest and took her heart out and burned it on a nearby rock. Instead of kindling, burned it on a nearby rock. They let the ashes scatter, and then he went home. And supposedly he did. He burst into tears, but he did have a vision or an epiphany that Sarah did come to him and say, told him, "Papa, I'm fine now. I'm all right. I'll always love you and Mama, and I'm waiting for you to join me in heaven." And that's supposedly the story. All these people really lived, and that's the truth of it.
Okay. Well, now there are medical explanations for the nails.
Yes.
And teeth showing. Mm-hmm. But unless there were long periods of time between the death of each child, there isn't a medical explanation for why she would be the least decomposed.
Right. She had died. She was several months, nearly a year in the grave, and we can only speculate as to why. There's been explanations.
Infestation would have been key.
Yes. Yeah. And because she was the incorruptible, she was the vampire, and perhaps obviously her grave had not flooded. A lot of times, especially in New England, the grave will flood over a course of time. But why would she be frozen and the others not? And so we really don't know. I mean, without modern forensics, there's no way to tell why in 1799 that she would not have decomposed properly, and brothers and sisters who had died much more recently would have. We can only speculate. And it's interesting because at that time, the whole country was in mourning too, because we just lost George Washington, our first president. Died in December of 1799. So,
wow,
that's a good point. Yeah, you put in history into context. Yeah. Now, Keith,
yes.
Why do you think these appearances of her kept happening? It seemed like everybody in the family kept having visitations from Sarah. Do you think those were legitimate visitations, or were they hallucinating? What do you think was going on there?
Well, yeah, that's a very good question, Mike. I leave it up to the reader to decide which you think is the explanation. But I mean, there's to me, it could have been spiritual. It could have been, but there's also psychological explanations. I mean, you're missing your recently deceased sister, and you yourself have these chest pains and everything like that. You might wake up dreaming that and feeling paralyzed that your sister is sitting on your chest and she's calling to you. I mean, I guess psychologically that could be an explanation too. But it certainly did affect the family, and it affected the whole town. The whole town was kind of going, I wouldn't say crazy, but they were, what is Snuffy Tillinghast going to do? Is this going to happen to us? He better do something to stop this malady, because what if it comes to our family? And so they did take the spiritual remedy, and supposedly that's one more child, a daughter living on another farm who was married, did die, but they figured she was too far gone anyway. So, but after that, there were no more immediate deaths in the family. So
was it only their family who was affected?
I'm sure there were others in the community. It's just that Snuffy Tillinghast, the Tillinghast family, they were kind of an example to the community, because he was so prominent, such a large family, such a large orchard, prominent church members. I think they looked upon them as kind of the epitome. They were like the pillars of the community. So, if they start whittling down, what's going to happen to the rest of us? And so they used them as an example. And most of the family lived to a ripe old age after that.
Now, do you think this case influenced the Mercy Brown case?
I do. I do think it influenced the Mercy Brown case. And the reason I think so is because, again, when this was the Brown family, a century later, that the father was advised by members of the Grange that he belonged to. The Exeter Grange, Exeter, Rhode Island Grange, the same one that Snuffy Tillinghast had belonged to. And they were related to the Tillinghasts. Now, of course, the Tillinghasts and the Browns today are very, very prominent. Oh, yeah, they were actually related. They were actually related. And at the time, of course, we're going to the 1880s and 1890s now, but the mother of the Brown family had died in 1883, December 1883. 6 months later, June 1884, Mary Olive, the eldest daughter, dies of consumption of tuberculosis. But there are no more deaths. And this is a very, very prominent church family. Practically the whole town, certainly the whole congregation, turned out when Mary Olive died, and they sang her favorite hymn at her gravesite and everything. But several years went by, and there were no more deaths until the son, the only son. Now, this is very important. The son, he's the only son of the Brown family, and he's expected to carry on the family name. He's a very strong, strapping fellow. That's how he was described as. And he started getting very, very ill himself and developed a severe cough. And, of course, after a while, coughing blood. So the doctor knew what it was. But they sent him out to, his name was Edwin, the oldest brother. They sent him out to the Colorado Springs to drink of the mineral water. Excuse me. And he was newly married. And so he went with his wife out there. He did seem to recover for a while. Meanwhile, his sister, now the eldest sister, still surviving, Lena. And Lena was, her first name was Mercy, but she actually in life did go by her middle name, Lena. And she became ill, and she developed the galloping form of consumption, and wasted and died very rapidly. And so Mercy Lena died and was buried, and she was actually buried in January of 1892. And soon after, the son came home. He had a relapse, and he came home essentially to die, to see his relatives to die. And now, of course, the poor father, George Brown, is frantic. It's interesting that George Brown did not believe in the vampire remedy. He did not believe in this superstition. However, the Grand Master of the Exeter Grange, his name was George Rose. He and his family had an exhumation of a family member looking for the undead. And so it's though there's no record of it, it's very, very likely he talked to George Brown and told him, this is how we handled this situation. You might want to do the same. And the other members of the Grange probably went along with that. He himself did not believe in it, but I mean, it's his only son. Medical science was not offering a cure at the time. So finally, he agreed to it, not wanting to, but he agreed to it out of desperation to save his only son. And so they sent the county medical examiner who had attended Mercy Lena. They sent a 19-year-old farmhand to his house to get him to do the exhumations, or at least perform autopsies in the cemetery. And his name was Harold Metcalf, 33 years old at the time, and he was like incredulous. He said, I'm the county medical examiner. I'm a prominent physician. I can't go out to a cemetery performing autopsies in the middle of the day looking for the undead. So he sent the young man away. Young man came back with a collection from George Brown of a substantial amount of money. So essentially, Harold Metcalf said, "Well, if you put it that way, I'll do it. But I don't believe in it. But if you pay me, I'll do it." So it was March. It was actually March, and Mercy Brown had been buried on January 17th. Her death date, anyway, was the 17th, and she'd been buried soon afterwards. And she'd been buried in a crypt, a holding crypt, where they stored the bodies to wait for the spring thaw when they could bury it because the ground was frozen.
Yeah, she wasn't even in the ground, right?
No, she wasn't even in the ground. She was in the holding crypt. And so when Harold Metcalf arrived, they had the bodies of the mother and the daughter, Mary Olive, out of their graves, and he did autopsy them. Now, Mary Eliza Brown, the mother, died at 36 years old. She was basically, some of the skin and muscles were in a mummified state, and the heart was still there, but it was just a dried lump of flesh, so very little needed to be done to show that was not the undead member of the family. And the sister, Mary Olive, had gone to a complete skeleton, except she had a very long head of hair still. That was all that remained. Then it was, the only one left was Mercy Lena. They took her from the holding crypt and opened her casket. There she is. She's not only is she perfectly preserved, she's rolled over into a sleeping position. Now, no explanation. The fact that she was perfectly preserved, yes, she had been buried above ground in the two coldest months of the year.
Yeah, she was basically on ice.
Yeah, she was. She was on ice. And even Dr. Metcalf said, I don't see anything unusual about her preservation, her state of decay right now. He did do the autopsy and saw signs of tuberculosis in her lungs, so the scar tissue. And he did excise her heart and liver. And both organs did drip some blood out, which I think was freshly defrosted blood. And that's all the people need to see. And these, you picture this scene. These were church members. They were all men. They were all men. And there's one of their recently deceased female parishioners, and they're watching her being stripped naked and cut open. The same one that they may have shared a pew with in church and sang hymns. And but they're convinced now that she's the undead. And
and George is having to watch this happen to his entire family. Well, at least 3 members of his family.
Actually, George did not attend.
He did not attend. Okay.
No, it's because today you think of this, it's such an indignity due to this beautiful young woman and who was a faithful parishioner, and
but so he's still having to agree. He's still having to agree for these people to do this, to dig them up, and like you said, strip his daughter naked and all that. He's having to agree for these other men to do that. Yeah, right.
He wasn't there to actually witness it. But they did burn according to the old superstition, they did burn the organs on a nearby rock, saved the ashes, and I guess they left it up to Edwin. Here's a way to inoculate yourself from this terrible disease of the undead. We're going to mix these with water and herbs, and we want you to drink it. And Edwin did agree. He drank the ashes of his sister's organs, and unfortunately, that was not a cure. He died on May 2nd, 1892, less than 2 months later. And, the sad thing is that her gravestone, Mercy Lena's gravestone, has no epitaph, no Christian epitaph on it, even though she was a devout parishioner.
Yeah, I guess that's true. Yeah, there it is. You're right. There's no epitaph.
Yeah, you see the iron bar that's around her headstone. That's because in 1992 it was actually stolen.
Oh wow!
Somebody wanted that for a keepsake, so they put the word out. If you are caught, you will be terribly prosecuted. However, whoever did this, if you do return this undamaged, no questions asked. So it was returned privately, and that's why the steel bar there, or iron bar, whatever it is, they're encasing it in so nobody can just pluck it off again.
But here's the thing. You still can't explain, and I don't mean you personally.
Right.
Okay, that, again, the coldest month, I get it.
Mm-hmm.
Not being, decomposed. I get it. Cold months. No insects, cold months. I have yet, in all my years of studying death, because it fascinates me,
yeah,
I have never in my life heard of anybody being able to roll over in their grave to a sleeping position.
Mm-hmm.
That's unexplainable. And especially when people think about the coffins as they would be back then and not as they are now, where they have a domed top now, everything else, and they're quite roomy for no reason. Back then, that would not have been the case. They would have been, the standard size, flat top, handmade, no adornments, no cush, no nothing like that. Very, very, very raw and regular. Impossible to roll over in.
Right. Why that is, I don't have any explanation. I don't think anybody does. Did
the Brown family live on the same grounds that the original family lived on?
They lived nearby. All in Exeter, right near where the Tillinghast family was. And their farm was nearby. And there has been activity there. There has been activity in the years since in that cemetery. Even family members have seen a big glowing ball of light, so bright you could hardly look at it. And of course, if you go there now at night, they've got all these solar lights anyway that people are on the graves with, so it's hard to tell what's paranormal and what's not. But people years ago did see that great big glowing bluish ball of light hovering over her grave. Some people think that she's wandering. I don't believe she is. I believe she's rests with God. And but I do know of a friend of mine. Her daughter went to her and her friends drove into the cemetery at night. Suddenly, all the car doors locked and they couldn't get out. So they started to panic, and I guess they said a quick prayer, and they were able to open it, and they got out of there and never came back.
That's interesting.
I want to come.
You want to go? I'll be glad to give you a tour. It's a beautiful place. It's a beautiful place.
I might make my way up
to make that trip. You should, Vanessa. You should come out to Ocean State Paracon next year.
You know what? I think I will.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have anything planned for July as it stands right now, so I think I will do that.
Oh, great!
There you go.
Great, and you see these people. They're wandering all over the place. We're looking for Mercy Brown. We can't find her grave. Where is she? All you have to do is drive straight in. There's a clump of trees. There it is on the left. So it's about 100 yards in, and that's it.
Wow!
I've seen people circling around and around and around. It's right there as you first come in, practically.
Good gravy.
Well, we're winding down toward the end of the show. We have several questions out there in the chat, so let's go ahead and get to those before we sign off here. From Sean Oldsmith, friend of ours out in Australia, he asks, "What is your opinion of vampire spirits that take your energy?"
Psychic vampires. I do believe in. I do believe there are people that are psychic vampires, not even realizing it. Sometimes, for some reason, and some certain people will. I mean, we've all known people that are draining personalities. But some people they could be physically ill. They could have a cancer or something like that, something that's eating at them, and for some reason, psychically, they drain other people's energy as a matter of nothing conscious. It's nothing they do purposely. And of course, there are people that do drain energy intentionally from people that are called psychic vampires. I do believe there are certain spirits that drain energy from people, that they take vital life forces and can make people pretty sick. And that's why it can be very, very dangerous to conjure spirits because you don't really know what you're conjuring. But yeah, I do believe there are various forms of psychic vampires.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and I do as well, actually. From Beat 3 Airspace, one of our Deep Down the Rabbit Hole Patreon patrons, have you met vampires in New Orleans?
No, I've never been out there. I would like to. Not, I would like to be with safe company. Yeah, when doing it, but yeah,
I'll meet you down there.
Oh,
that's Vanessa's favorite place.
That I would love to do. And I watched Preacher. The TV show Preacher, based on the comic, and the vampires in there are wonderful. They're really cool, especially Cassidy, the vampire Cassidy, and he's like, we've all known Cassidy. Cassidy's like, we've all known somebody like Cassidy. He happens to be a vampire, but if you watch the show, I mean, we've all known somebody down and out that has an addictive personality and just looking for friends and just can't seem to fit in and is the outcast. So yeah, that's one of my favorite vampires. The fictional vampires is Cassidy.
Okay,
I'll have to check that out.
Cassidy.
Very cool. Betty Lange is asking, has Keith met any modern day vampires?
Have I met? Yes, I have. Now, these were not the Hollywood type that come out of a casket, although maybe someone would like to sleep on and turn into bats and things like that. But I have met practitioners of vampirism where they have actual cults of vampire cults where they will actually. It actually does become an addiction where they physically need small amounts of blood, just small, but they need small amounts of human blood, and usually they find donors, other members of the cult or friends or things like that. And yes, I have met practitioners. There was a dangerous one going back to the early 70s, and then again, Ed and Lorraine Warren knew of this young woman too. She was a teenage girl, called herself Lilith, after the deity Lilith, and she would hang around in cemeteries. She got in big trouble once because she was hanging around the cemetery and dressed in all this goth makeup and everything. I guess it's a weekend night. A guy pulls over. Oh, look at that chick! Oh, wow, so cool! She's kinkier than I am. And he comes. She said, "Why don't you sit next to me?" And he's, "Oh yeah," and everything. They start making out. Before you know it, she's got the bite on him, and she sent him to the hospital. She sent him to the emergency room. She took a big chunk out of his neck, severed a vein or something, and really did some damage to him. So she really had a very sick obsession there.
Oh yeah,
and I think she was tied to the demonic as well because she was a practitioner of demonic arts.
Okay.
Wow.
Oof,
that's
brutal.
A real
that's brutal.
Witch. That was not, unlike in the Harrisville case, that was a real satanic witch.
Yeah. We do have a $5 super chat from Raul Pfeiffer Mueller. Thank you very much, Raul. Vielen Dank, mein Freund. This is from Judy Wilson. We kind of brought this up earlier with the questions out there. Are there any accounts of people today digging up people to check for vampirism? I know we talked about Romania. Is there anybody else doing that these days?
I think there are countries that still do that. But they're probably isolated pockets, and it's. I hesitate to name certain provinces and countries because there's no proof of it, but we know that it is going on somewhere in Romania. We know it has gone on fairly recently history in England, different parts of the countryside in England, where a prominent priest in the 1970s, early 1970s, did supposedly find a real vampire. And it was a decayed corpse, and somehow it was moving around from place to place. It had been locked in a tomb. Then it shows up in an old house. We don't know how it got there, but he finally did and he had actually very, very disturbing picture of it. There's a desiccated corpse. He actually did the ritual of disposing of it. They put the holly stake through the heart and the Eucharist in the mouth and severing the head and stuff like that, and then burning it. So basically, you've got to burn the corpse to keep it down,
Right. Here's a suggestion from Zippy Davis about Mercy Brown. He asks, could an earthquake shake the ground enough to turn her over? And I don't know if we're talking Rhode Island, already doesn't get very many earthquakes, but I don't know if there's any reports from back then about earthquakes.
That's a good idea. I don't know what the seismic activity was there, how detailed records they kept. I haven't heard of any. I certainly haven't heard of any. I certainly is a possibility. One, she was not embalmed. She was not embalmed. I would hate to think that there was any life force still alive in her when she was buried, but there was no signs of a struggle. So God forbid that would have happened. Yeah. But no, that is an interesting supposition why that may have happened.
Yeah.
Generally, the shoulder span to turn over would be too wide, even on a small body.
Yes.
To be able to do that, considering the depth of a coffin made at that time.
Yeah. So I don't know. That's the one thing that remains a mystery. Why she was turned over into a sleeping position, looking very peaceful. It's whereas Sarah Tillinghast was not, her eyes wide open, big smile and everything. But Mercy just seemed to be calmly sleeping.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And then from Tammy Heitzman, and then we'll have to wrap up the show. Tammy Heitzman asks, what was the most bizarre experience that you had at the Perron farm?
No, my most bizarre experience was what was happening up in that room when suddenly all heck started and Nancy was slapped, one of the sisters, and things started moving around. It was just all of a sudden, it just happened so fast that time seemed to slow down. It was almost like you were in a bubble. But then again, I realized, and then Andrea had to go down and she came up to me and said, Keith, not that I'm a chicken, but I have to go get some preserves. Would you mind coming to the cellar with me? And I said, not at all. And we came downstairs, and there's just one light bulb that could have gone out at any moment. And so she was getting really nervous. She could feel it coalescing again. But I took her hand, mentioned the name of Jesus, and everything was all right. And we came back upstairs. But upstairs in that bedroom, the things going around, all this activity, that was the most horrendous thing to me there.
Okay.
Yeah, it sounds like it.
Yeah, definitely a very, very wild experience that you guys had there. And again, just reading Andrea's book and all the things books, because she has a trilogy, just reading about what really happened there over such a long period of time. To me, it's you have those parts there that are a lot more terrifying than what they showed in the movie, and yes, mixed in with the light as well, but so much more than what they showed in the movie.
Oh yeah, so much more, and that's why she's writing a trilogy of scripts so that she can get as much of what went on in there in that trilogy of movies. So you get to see more and more of the story. But it's just fantastic, people there after the experience, and Roger came back there, and Spirit actually, one of the spirits actually liked him and would rub his back for him and everything like that, and supposedly was very jealous of his wife, Carolyn. So.
Okay.
And spirit girlfriend.
And just real quick, Gary wants me to ask you what you and he found at Mercy Brown's tomb the last time you were there.
Oh yeah. Good point. Yes, we came there to the cemetery, and there was the tomb. Of course, it's all walled up. It's cinder block now, so nobody can get in. There's the door just wrenched off its hinges, off, very disrespectful. And obviously they think they're going to find a coffin there with a vampire girl in it. There's nothing in there, and it's cinder blocked over. But somebody had done some damage, just torn that lock right off, used a crowbar or something like that. I mean, that's
terrible.
It's a beautiful cemetery, and to desecrate like that, it doesn't do anything. And people like us who want to research the history, that puts a damper on us too.
Yeah, makes it that much tougher for us.
Yeah, it'll be off limits, and I know you people always gain permission to go into these places, and we try to too. But something doing like senseless vandalism like that, it accomplishes nothing. And they obviously all they found was cinder blocks for all their efforts, and somebody has to pay to fix that and everything. Right. So it just does everybody all around is a disservice, I think.
Yep. People are idiots.
Right.
Yeah. Unfortunately. So, all right, Keith. Well, I really want to thank you for coming on the show. What do you have coming up? You mentioned you're doing some more writing. Of course, you're you're doing Ghost or Near. You always seem to have a lot going on. So, what's up?
Oh yeah. Still doing Ghost Are Near and writing a handbook on demonology. My brother has a handbook on demonology out there, Carl, and that's well worth the read. And we're going to be soon making a trip, New England Anomalies Research. Sandra and I are going to be making a trip to the Borden House in Fall River, Massachusetts, which is
nice.
another story connects. Yep, and that story too. We're going to be doing a show there, one of our Ghost on Air episodes, and Gary's going to join us. He was the first local group his was the first local group to investigate that house. So yeah, we're going to be doing a Ghost on Air episode there at the Borden House soon.
Good.
Fantastic.
I would love to do that too.
You guys can join us.
Same.
I would love to. Yeah. You guys are so far out there.
I know. Just little New England here.
Right. No, I love the area, though. I mean, I spent 10 years of my life in Massachusetts, so I've always loved that area. And, so getting
very
back
rich
there.
History.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I love the history. And just getting back there this summer was a real treat. So be there next year. Vanessa, you got to come.
I will. Count me in.
Okay, great.
All right.
We'll make a date of it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right, Keith. Well, thank you very much for coming on. We'll go ahead and let Keith go, and then we'll get to all the shout outs, and then we'll get on to our next show. So again, Keith, thank you very much. Where can they find your your books real quick?
Oh, I can go on Amazon.com or go to our website, nearparanormal.com. That way you get an autographed, personalized copy.
Yay!
All right, fantastic. Well, thanks again, Keith. Really do appreciate it.
Very well.
All right.
Bless you both.
You have a great night.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Yeah, bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Take care.
All right. Well, that was an absolute treat having Keith Johnson
That
on.
was.
It was. I do want to apologize. I know people were talking about it down there in the chat, all the technical issues, the buffering, all that. It seemed like toward the end that kind of cleared up a bit, at least on what I was seeing on my end. So, yeah. All right. Well, let's go ahead and get to the shout outs. And so let's see. I want to, of course, thank Shauna, our chat shenanigator, for doing her thing down there in the chat room, feeding me all the questions. Donna Gorton, our Cheshire cat, is in the house. So thank you as well. Let's get to the super chats. Super Chat Superstar. So we had BD Flint just before the show started, Tom McNicholas, and Raul Mueller. Thank you all very, very much for that. Excuse me. I think that's dinner coming back. Yeah. All right. So there's Beat 3 Airspace, one of our Deep Down the Rabbit Hole Patreon patrons. So Deep Down the Rabbit Hole Patreon patrons. We have Tom McNicholas, Beat 3 Airspace, Zippy Davis, BD Flint, Pamela Queen, and Andrew Cox. Thank you all very, very much. And oh, by the way, for this past Saturday when we had our investigation of Spiral Mounds, I do want to make sure that Andrew Cox got a shout out for a super chat for that night. So I know I was missing a lot. The connection was terrible out there and all that. So I want to make sure you got that. All right, so let's see. Speaking of, there's Andrew Cox right down there in the chat room. Gary the Fam, thanks for joining us tonight. And I know you are sharing some stuff down in the chat room about things that you and Keith have done. So that's very, very great. I guess you're saying you've done a documentary with Keith about Mercy Brown. So be sure to check that out as well. All right, there's Tim Schoen. Thank you very much, Tim, for joining us tonight. Sean Gilmore. Hey, I'll be seeing you on Sunday. Let's see. There's Fran Molino. Thank you very much. Betty Lange, thank you for joining us tonight. There's Kathy Ciliento. Thanks again. Spooky Dawn. Thanks for joining us tonight. There's Bridget Willis. Thank you as well. And Joe Chandler. Thank you as always. Sean Oldsmith. Thank you for your question tonight. Katie Palmer. Thank you as well. There is Chuck Banks, Beyond the Light Network, simulcasting over Spreaker. All right.
Chucky!
Jeebus the Gamer Nerd. Hey, thanks for joining us tonight. Always great to see new faces in the house. There's Shadowcat. Thanks for joining us again. Jill Nachimsky, thank you for joining us again tonight. There's Robert White, our other buddy from Australia. All right. And Pungai Fungi, thanks for joining us once again. Tammy Heisman, thanks. a kick out of that, I know. Tammy Eisman,